put it simply, she was amazing. She rocked their world. She was a stick of feminist dynamite tossed into the starched white shirts of Boston's staid establishment. She was a perpetual percolator, churning against those who preferred their religion rational and reserved. Propriety be damned. For her, life was a self-made adventure, a chance to cultivate the mind, the heart, and her intuition. In a world that praised conformity, she broke the mold, remaking herself into a mystic. She was Margaret Fuller, the spiritual godmother of modern Unitarian Universalism. Now, if she was once so important, why do so few of us know her name? Why doesn't Margaret Fuller blaze as brightly as her friends and intellectual equals, men she hung out with like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne? A leader in the 19th century intellectual flowering of New England, she has been pruned from our collective consciousness. As we approach the 200th anniversary of her birth a few Sundays from today on May 23rd, why doesn't America celebrate the mother of human rights with fireworks? Consider, if you will, just a few of her many accomplishments. Margaret Fuller was the first literary editor of a major U.S. metropolitan newspaper, the New York Tribune. She was the first major U.S. foreign correspondent sent over to Europe to report back, the first person ever to do that. She was one of 19th century America's most highly paid public lecturers. She was the author of 5 books and almost 350 articles, essays, and poems. She was the first woman to step into and use Harvard University's library. She was the author of the first book on women's rights written by an American. Biographer Eve Kornfeld writes, Fuller's friends and foes alike agreed that she was an unforgettable central figure in early 19th century America. The Unitarian philosopher and author Ralph Waldo Emerson considered her one of his luminaries, a shining light in his intellectual circle. All of this was done in the early 1800s, at a time when women had no right to vote, had limited access to education, and faced an overwhelming social pressure to remain silent and subservient. All this was done as a faithful Unitarian who stretched herself spiritually and ultimately embraced a new and natural relationship with her God. The Reverend Dr. Tandeka, a leading contemporary Unitarian Universalist theologian, recently wrote this about Margaret Fuller. She taught America how to think, feel, and act with non-dogmatic, life-affirming spirituality. Margaret Fuller showed Americans how the human heart transforms liberal faith into action. Let's see how she did that. Margaret Fuller was born not far from here in Cambridgeport, that snippet of land along the Charles River near what is now known as Central Square. Her home still stands at 71 Cherry Street, and you could visit it this afternoon if you wanted. She was born on May 23rd, 1810. Her full name was Sarah Margaret Fuller, and she was born into a Unitarian middle-class family that had a lot of troubles, as we will soon hear. In the year of her birth, Boston's population numbered just 35,000. Imagine Boston, that's small. Its cultural conservatism made it seem much smaller. hers was not an ordinary childhood. She recounts that her earliest memory was that of the death of her younger sister. She remembers being filled with grief and loneliness. This experience was followed by an emotionally stifling childhood, one she describes as being filled with glooms and terrors. In her memoirs, she said she had no natural childhood. Now, to understand what she means when she says her childhood was not natural, we first have to remember what gender meant in the early 1800s, how gender roles were carefully constructed. As biographer Eve Kornfeld states, early 19th century American culture fostered the belief in a dualistic opposition of masculinity and femininity. Popular literature and science of the time supported the idea that men and women had an inherent essential nature. Women were compassionate, self-effacing, and mentally inferior. Men were rational, selfish, and intellectually superior. To challenge these gender roles and boundaries meant to be branded unnatural, for these cultural constructions were taken to be immutable, natural, and most important, divinely ordained by God. The social inferiority of women, it was believed, was God's will. God had put it in place, and let no man, and certainly no woman, change that. The different methods of educating boys and girls reinforced these beliefs. Language itself became divided according to gender. Middle-class boys studied the classics, mathematics, natural science, history, and theology. They learned an aggressive language suitable for debate. On the other side, middle-class girls, a few who attended female academies or finishing schools, studied literature, art, languages, dance, music. They were taught a docile language intended to soothe and smooth over controversy.